Aloha! Welcome to the Live Ukulele podcast. My name is Brad Bordessa, and we're back. This is season number 3. We made it. Pretty cool. I don't think many people who start a podcast get this far. From what I've seen, all the podcasts out and available on ukulele stuff, they got a handful of episodes, maybe a handful of seasons, but not a lot of season 3s, and it's fun to be able to have all those past episodes in the bag and be able to bring you all along for the ride twice a month to talk about ukulele stuff. There's a lot to look forward to this year with liveukulele.com and the Live Ukulele podcast and just music and ukulele playing in general. But to get started this year, I thought I would throw together kind of an overview podcast with some tips about just generally improving at the ukulele. Nothing super specific, just like what helps make you a better ukulele player and some things that you can implement right now to, take your playing up to the next level. Want to encourage you to please subscribe on your favorite podcasting service. It helps boost the visibility of the podcast, and since this is a labor of love, it's really just a way for me to get people familiar with Live Ukulele and my work. And if it's not reaching people, it makes it a little bit harder to justify the time that I put into it. So if we can get it out there to as many people as possible, that's great. It's a free way you can support what I do with the podcast. So head over to Apple Podcasts or Google Podcasts or Anchor or whatever you use and click on subscribe. Before we get started, just a little bit of an update and some news. I have started filming my new course, Left Hand Technique for Ukulele. It's going to be based off of my popular book on fretting hand technique. But this time, I'm going to dive into it with video examples, and we're going to go way deeper than the book ever went, and I'm laying it out so that it's more of a structured lesson plan. Start at the beginning of the very fundamentals of how to play notes on the ukulele, how to optimize your fretting, make sure you're playing everything as cleanly as possible and with as the least amount of tension in your hand as possible, and working up from there through different examples and songs, up to advanced articulations and, crazy stuff that most people are probably never going to need or use. But it'll be there, and I'm really happy to finally be putting this onto video, recording it. It's going to take me a while to put it together because I've got almost 50 lessons planned out. So it's going to be quite a process, but the end result should be a really super solid set of lessons, super solid course, and hopefully will bring a lot of information to you folks and be super useful. So keep an eye out for that. If you want to stay up to date on everything that I'm doing, please subscribe to my newsletter or keep an ear on the podcast because I'll be announcing it here as well. Thanks for your support, and thanks for joining me here, the first episode of season 3 of the Live Ukulele podcast. I will shut up now and move along to some tips that you can implement in your playing. Thanks for tuning in. So my number one tip is always the same thing. Work on your timing. I have pretty much yet to run across an ukulele player who couldn't benefit from their improving their timing. Right? This is something that pretty much every student that I teach can improve. It's something that pretty much every musician that you even listen to can improve. Right? The stuff that you hear on the radio, it's obviously performed at a high level, but that high level can always be improved. And that high level is also, one of many probably takes that it took to put the song together in that perfect of a way, and or it was edited to be that perfect. Not so much for older music, but even in older music, you can hear the variations in timing. And that's because timing is hard for human beings. So something that you can do, I won't go into the details of how to really improve your timing because I've done some lessons and some videos on that in the past. But what I think is a missed opportunity for most folks is to not be practicing with a metronome while you're working on other things. If you're just focusing on practicing one thing, that is kind of wasted time. You would be able to practice more if you got to the point where you can practice along with a metronome. That way you're practicing your timing without really even thinking about it or without really knowing it. And you can also practice whatever you're currently working on. So that's kind of two birds with one stone. Metronomes can be had for free. There are apps, there are web apps that you can get in your browser. You could buy a physical metronome. Whatever floats your boat, having that and learning to play along with it will do wonders for every ukulele player out there. And it's something that once you kind of get over the learning curve and you get on board and you're able to keep time and place your songs and your exercises around that metronome click, you're going to be automatically internalizing a sense of timing and improving upon that. And really, that's, if you practice without the metronome, that's time that you just can't get back. But if you're doing two things at once, you're just going to go that much further, that much faster. Work on your timing. Tip number 2 is going to show off my little bit of party pooper side of things. As a teacher, some folks have called me a party pooper before, which I take as a huge compliment, but it's just kind of how I approach teaching and how I do things. I'm kind of a hard ass. I don't necessarily paint pretty rosy pictures for everybody. I don't try and blow smoke anywhere. And that's who I am. That's what I do. It's kind of the Hawaiian music background side of, who I am and where I come from. So this is going to encompass a number of things kind of along those party pooper lines. But the main thing is that lots of folks kind of distract themselves and waste a lot of time when doing ukulele stuff. And this can come in many different forms, which is why I'm going to try and wrap this all into one tip. But they find ways to avoid practicing, or they browse forums or Facebook or whatever, or window shop. That's another thing. But like lots of ways that take away from time that could be spent practicing ukulele. And if there's one thing that I've seen and learned over the years, is that there is absolutely no substitute for time spent on the instrument. If you're holding it and you're strumming it or you're picking it, you're practicing, you're getting more familiar with the instrument and how you can respond musically and become a musician, right? But if you're doing things that are in the ukulele sphere, whether or not they bring you joy, that's beside the point. I'm not trying to judge anybody for being on ukulele forums. I go on ukulele forums. I look at ukuleles and stuff. But just from a pure, I want to become a better player standpoint, none of that is going to help you. So less is going to be more in that situation. If you can take that time doing whatever, thinking about other ukuleles or planning which ukulele you're going to buy when your paycheck comes in, or reading about what strings are best, or blah blah blah, whatever it might be, you know what they are. Switch that for practice time. Make that into practice time, or at least make some of it into practice time. That's going to help you become a better musician than somebody who just kind of watches from the sidelines and isn't actually actively involved in playing music on the instrument. Tip number 3 kind of goes hand in hand with tip number 2. But basically, it is, don't let gear define you. Don't let strings define you. Don't let the instrument define you. Let music define you. I know this is something that I was terribly guilty of when I was a younger player, in that not so much that I would want an ukulele, because for me, I had a pretty straightforward progression through having a super crappy little ukulele and then buying myself a better student model. And then I knew it was like a year later, I was like, wow, I really like this. This is my thing. I want to do this. And so I saved up and I bought myself my Kamaka. And from that point, especially at that time, there wasn't much better than a kamanka. So it was fine for a long time. But I did do a lot of experimenting with strings. And basically, the advice that I can give from my more experienced self to folks who maybe haven't been down that rabbit hole is the returns are very, very diminishing the further you go. There are a few main string types that maybe you want to check out. Try fluorocarbon, try nylon, try the Nile gut thing. See what flavor you like. But beyond that, get one if it really says to you, this is my sound. Try a few, see what you like, see what your main flavor choice is. And then from there, you just kind of commit. Just, that's good enough. It sounds great. Why keep going and keep looking for something that might not even exist? Maybe there's nothing better. Maybe you just found it. Maybe that's the best thing for you and you just keep looking. It's a lot of wasted time that you can't get back. I'm a fan of Rage Against the Machine, the heavy metal band, kind of hip-hop band from the 90s. Their guitar player, Tom Morello, talks a lot about a moment when he was young and when he was just practicing and working on his chops in the band, where he showed up one day and he had been playing around with his pedals and his amp and just like struggling to find that magic sound that we all imagine inside our heads. He just couldn't get there. But he realized one day, it's like, wow, this is pretty good, but I'm not going to let the gear define me. I'm going to call it quits. This is good enough. I'm going to use these pedals and this amp and this guitar, and this is good enough. That's it. And so that's pretty much what he did. That was his setup pretty much all the way through Rage Against the Machine. That is what he played, and that was his sound. Because he realized that the music makes such a much larger difference than the actual gear and the actual instrument. And especially with an instrument like ukulele, which is just an acoustic instrument, the differences between them and the differences between strings, they're really small compared to when you get to like an electric guitar where you have a new pedal can completely change the sound of what you're doing. So just don't let the gear define you. Try not to go too far down the rabbit hole. Some can be fun, but in the interest of becoming a better player, diminishing returns. Not that crazy important to your musical journey. Tip number 4. I really like this one, and I think it's super important. Maybe it should be number 1. I don't know if we're going in reverse order or backwards order or what, but I hope you'll bear with me and not give too much weight to what order these actually are in, because I'm just kind of winging it here. But tip number 4 is to mess around with your instrument. Just try things. This can be any number of different things for any number of different people. Maybe you're an ukulele player who likes to strum a lot. Play chords in different orders that you might not normally play them in. Just create. Add a finger here. Take a finger away there. If you're holding down the chord shape, there's a lot of variation you can create just by altering one string, the note on one string. You just move that note around. You'll end up with some interesting voicings, especially if you do it where you're not intentionally thinking about what it is. Just play music and try and create cool sounds and kind of switch on that play by ear sort of mode. That's really super important. And it's something that I think it's easy to forget about, especially for me as a teacher. I'm always trying to think about how to explain things and how to, put them into language and put them into concepts so that I can transfer them from my head to your head. But there's so much that I could spend a lifetime trying to teach the things that I have just discovered intuitively. And you can discover them intuitively as well if you just kind of give yourself permission to goof around, try different things out. I've spent probably at this point, I have spent more time just trying things and just improvising, just, trying to make cool sounds than I have actually practicing or even actually playing, perhaps. The majority of the time that I spend on the instrument when I'm playing is improvisation and like, oh, what would happen if I did this? Or what would happen if I did this? Or trying to play things in ways I've never played them before. It's not because I expect it to be good. It's because I'm curious and I want to see, oh, what does this do? What does this sound like? Could this work? And trying those things and not approaching it as a critic, just approaching it as a curiosity. Because I think that that's something that is a big detriment to Western minds and Western thinking, and certainly Western style ukulele players. If you're from the USA mainland or even places that are like, developing countries coming on up and they're kind of becoming this, this new age globalized place. The style of thinking is changing from intuitive to very much thinking based, right? Everything can be explained with math or physics or science, and you just explain it to death. Music is not something that you can explain with any of these things for the most part. You could have all the theory in the world and still not write a moving song because there's just no emotion to it. And so by just messing around on the instrument, you unlock the intuitive side of the music that you otherwise won't if you're just sticking to the lesson plan, practicing the notes, practicing the chords, whatever you're doing. You're missing out if you're not trying to push the boundaries of what you know and trying things and just really goofing around. It's super important, and I think everybody can benefit from it. I mean, all of my peers, they sit, and a lot of the time they spend on the instrument is just trying things. It's not trying to play it right. It's not trying to practice or improve. It's just like, oh, what happens if I do this? Think about the players that you really idolize and think about how much of what they can perform or what they bring to the table as an artist, how much of that would not exist if they had never experimented or just tried things. Half of what James Hill plays would never have existed if he wasn't just trying it out and like, oh, what would happen if I did this? What would happen if I stuck a chopstick here? Right? Half of what Jake does would never have existed because he wouldn't have discovered his sound. He wouldn't have discovered what it means to have that Jake sound. So this is super important. And even if you're not wanting to be a professional player, I give those examples because those are people who are well known. But any of us can create music. That's the bottom line, is that any of us have valid music to share. It's just harder to share if you don't have that intuitive approach to the music. And so by just playing around, being intuitive, trying things, spending some time playing things wrong, seeing what doesn't work, it's going to give you a better feel for presenting the music that you want to play. When you do want to intentionally play something, you're going to be more informed as a musician and as a person, as an emotionally connected person to the instrument and to the notes. Okay, so tip number 5 kind of piggybacks on the last one because it's force yourself to play by ear. This is almost the same thing, but I'll give it its own tip because I think that it deserves the extra attention. Force yourself to play by ear. People ask, how do I learn a song by ear? What are the steps? And you'll see people give like detailed responses of, well, you start by picking out the melody and figure out what scale it's in, or you figure out the key of the song so that you can know what chords are right. And those are both true, but they're also a lot more complicated than they need to be. The easiest way to play by ear is to just start doing it. And to start daring to suck, as James Hill says. I love that. Dare to suck. Because that's really all it is you're going to play by ear all the wrong notes until you find the one that you want, until you find the right note. I did a lesson on how to find the notes of a melody, a YouTube video that I uploaded a while back. That's probably worth a look, but really it's not super complicated. You just try notes until you find the one you want. And at first it's really super slow. I remember trying to figure out my first song by ear, and I was actually doing it the harder way. I was trying to figure out chords. I think that finding melody is an easier place to start and a better place to start. But I was trying to figure out the chords of the song, and it was really a simple song, as I found out once I got to the end of, working through it. But as I was working through it, I was pulling my hair out. It was absolutely miserable, and I was super frustrated. But then the next time I did it, it was easier, and it kept getting easier until now. I'm pretty much at a point, if I'm kind of my chops are up and I've been practicing, where you throw me up on stage and I can pretty much figure out the song as it's playing and, contribute to the song musically as it's going and just respond kind of intuitively and instantly, because I've spent all that time in the trenches just slogging it out. I was like, okay, what is this note? Oh, that's not right. That's not right. Oh, there it is. That's the one. And then what's the next note? Okay, no, that's not right. It's that one, right? And you just work your way through it and you go super slow. But I think a pitfall that a lot of people get stuck in is that they think that there's a certain way to play by ear, or there are certain rules to playing by ear, and there's not. Nothing could be further from the truth, is that playing by ear is just playing intuitively, because you've done it enough times that you know where the sound that you want is. If you're thinking about it technically and you're like, okay, well, the interval between there and there is a sixth, or it's a major sixth, that means it's X number of frets, or it's this shape, that's already really a super slow way of examining what's happening. It's way better just to play what you're trying to do and express it just by playing it. And if you're always trying to think it out, you never give yourself a chance to express it intuitively. Right? There's never that chance to have that alternative mode of thinking and interacting with the music. You're always locked into just, oh, it's this far away, so it must be this, and then it's this shape, and the song's over by the time you think through all that stuff. So by playing by ear and by just starting and by just struggle bussing until you get even one note is an achievement, and the next note that you play is going to be a little bit easier and a little bit easier and a little bit easier, until you get to the point where it becomes natural to play by ear. So I think that playing by ear is something that's super valuable to any player, especially if you don't do any of it. It gives you a really different view of the music, and it gives you what I feel is almost a more valuable view of the music, because you can respond musically, you can respond intuitively, and not have to think about it. That's really all there is to it. You just play it. So here's one that's a little bit ironic, because I wrote a book called Ukulele Chord Shapes that is, to my knowledge, one of the most thorough chord books you can get for ukulele. It has a ton of shapes and a lot of context for how they work on the fretboard. It's been well received. Lots of people love it. But I literally wrote the book about chords, and yet this next tip is going to be kind of against that grain. So tip number 6, don't learn fancy chords, or don't spend your time learning fancy chords. For most people, there are better things you could be practicing than trying to memorize a fancy jazz chord, or a family of fancy jazz chords. When you need a specific chord for a song, that's one situation. That's a whole kind of other thing. But as far as like knowing your chords, like, oh yeah, I know how to play all the major chords and I know how to play all the minor chords. When you're talking about that, You really don't need that much vocabulary. What's more important is what you do with it, right? So here's my proposed toolbox of chords that most people should have. Or I guess I should say that I'm super biased because this is the toolbox that I use for 99% of what I play. Major chords, minor chords, seventh chords. And then for each of those, you add an extension tone, right? So a major chord is a 3-note chord. To make it more fancy, you add a 4th note to it, right? So that would be 6th, sometimes major 7th. But major and major 6th. And then for minor, same thing. It's a 3-note chord. To make it a 4-note chord, you'd be playing minor 7ths. For 7th chords, that's already a 4-note chord. So what you're going to do is you add a 5th note. We only have 4 strings, so you have to get rid of one of the less important notes. That's all it is. You just get rid of it. Usually it's the root note. But now you have more sophisticated notes in that same chord, and that would be the 9th. So for major, you have the plain major chord. You have the major 6th chord, sometimes the major 7th. For minor, you have the plain minor chord and the minor 7th. And for 7th chords, you have the plain 7th chord and a dominant 9th chord. That's 6 chord families. Plus, it's nice to know like the diminished 7th shape. That's pretty handy, and it's only in one shape. That's super easy to learn. And it's probably a good idea to know an augmented chord in case you ever play anything weird that has that Star Wars intro sound. But beyond that, trying to memorize extra fancy chords, I don't think is the best way that most people could be using their time. Certainly, if you're an advanced player and you're really into jazz, there's a lot to be benefited from having a deeper understanding of harmony and knowing what more options might be. But for most folks, there's other things on this tip list that would be a lot more important to work on. Is your timing strong? I would rather hear a 9th chord played with good timing than a 13th chord played all over the beat, right? Musically, the 9th chord on time is going to sound better. It just is. Just from a musical standpoint, if you were to play 2 different clips for an average listener, the one that's on beat is going to sound way better than the one that's off beat every single time. They're not going to care what chord you're playing, whether it's fancy or not. Maybe it sounds a little bit more plain, but if you're playing something that sounds a little bit more complicated and it's still off beat, who cares? It's off beat. I can't dance to it. So those are the main chords that I would try and put my efforts towards. And to be completely honest, those are the chords that I mainly play. For me, as an ukulele player, if I go to a gig and I'm playing, or if I'm working on an arrangement, those 4-note chords to substitute with the major or the minor, those are completely sufficient for most of what I'm trying to do. And if I need a different sound, usually I'm going to just intuitively alter the chord by adding a finger on a string or taking away a finger on a string and trying to change some of the notes in the chord shape that I already know, then trying to figure out exactly what an appropriate substitution chord would be exactly. Like I never get out my chord book, and I don't actually have all of the chord shapes in the book internalized. I'm kind of whistleblowing on myself here, but it's true. I don't use all of those, so I don't have them in my head. They're just so obscure that there's not a super practical use for them. So it's a lot easier just to know a handful of chord families really well and be able to change them when you need something a little bit different. Right? I could play a 9th chord and know that from a 9th chord, if I put a finger here, it gets a little bit more weird. Or if I put a finger here, it gets a little bit more normal. You can kind of adjust the flavor just by adding a finger, and you don't even need to know what the chord is called or what family it is or what substitution it is. Does it sound good? I got to study a little bit with Kimo Hussey for a week at a workshop that was put on by my mentor, Kyoki Kahumoku. And one of his biggest kind of emphasis points, at least for me when we were doing private lessons, was play what sounds good. I asked him, I had been listening to a lot of Santana, and Santana makes notes sound really good, right? He's a fantastic guitarist, and he really makes them sound sweet. Everything he plays is really soulful and really moving musically. And I thought that there must be an explanation to this. He must be doing something that can be figured out musically, right? With theory or whatever. So I asked Kimo Hussey, it's like, can you show me what the best sounding intervals are? Because I thought maybe the distance between the notes is what was making the notes sound so good. And looking back on that, that's such an embarrassing question to have asked. But just by asking that and saying it out loud and by hearing his response was very thoughtful, of course. He said something along the lines of, well, why don't you try playing all the intervals and see which ones sound best to you? That was kind of the gist of his spiel. But looking back, there's no such thing as a perfect formula for having that substitution or for having that note that is going to sound better than the others. And it's really just a matter of experimenting and trying it. And does it sound good? If it sounds good, play it. If it doesn't, maybe you want to upgrade and find something better or not. Just, stick it out and stay with the thing that doesn't sound quite as good. But really, the choice is that simple: does it sound good, or do I want to try and find something else? And so from that standpoint, I think that most ukulele players can get away with a smaller chord vocabulary than they're led to believe. Certainly, if you're not playing jazz, you can keep it really simple. If you are playing jazz, there might be places where you want to know a 13th chord. But there are also places where you better be damn sure that you're playing that 13th chord on time before you're learning 13th chords, right? That's the more important piece. And that's what you should try. Try not to get stuck or hung up on one thing when it's really something else that's making it sound less ideal. That's really the main thing. Does it sound good? Tip number 7 is learn the entire song. Learn it all the way through. A lot of times it's easy to, especially if you're an ukulele player who doesn't sing and just likes to play instrumental stuff, it's really easy to get distracted by just playing the riffs or just playing the solo or just playing the cool parts, right? The stuff that's immediately attractive. Like, ooh, that's shiny. That's an exciting part of the song. Because if you don't play the other parts, you're missing out on a lot of the story. A song is a story. We expect there to be a certain format. We expect certain parts of the song, even if it's just a simple song that has verse, 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 and at the end of the verse you tag something. That's a structure, but you expect that sort of structure, and that's different from just being able to play the intro. Like, oh yeah, I know this song. And then you play the intro, but then there's nothing else to the song. It's not complete, and anybody that you were to play the song for wouldn't feel like it was complete either. Beyond that, I think that it's important from a discipline standpoint to learn to play songs all the way through. To be able to commit yourself to, I'm going to learn this song, and I'm going to get all the way through it instead of being distracted by the next thing or the next bit or the next song that I want to learn. Learn a song all the way through and practice it until you can play it well. I know that a lot of folks play ukulele as a hobby. That's fantastic. But in that kind of good vibes, it's just a hobby mindset, it's easy to get kind of complacent to maybe the craft. And it's a little bit more about, oh, just for fun, it's good times. And yes, it's those things, but don't let that be an excuse to only have part of a song, right? The craft of playing music is to present an entire song. So if you're shorting yourself and your listeners by not having that entire story, that's really too bad. And I speak to this as somebody who I spent a lot of time as a younger player just playing riffs and just playing intros and not having a complete package to perform for anybody. And I regret that because as a musician, I was very limited. I wasn't able to ever really get up on stage and present my own songs. I always had to be part of somebody else's band, so to speak, to be able to play music. If I only knew the riff, I had to be playing with somebody who could hold and carry the rest of the song. Otherwise, I couldn't present the whole song. So in the interest of being able to be a musician, a self-contained musician yourself, I would really encourage you to learn the entire song, learn it all the way through. If you're singing the song, learn as many of the words as you can, as many of the verses as are practical. For most pop kinds of songs, that's going to be fairly straightforward. There's not going to be that many words unless you're learning a Bob Dylan song or something. But I think that you'll find that in the long run, it becomes more fulfilling to have complete music to present, whether it be for yourself or for an audience. Just that discipline of being able to, boom, here's a song all the way through that I learned, that I took the time to dedicate myself to. Otherwise, I'm not quite exactly sure, what the point is, honestly. I can't remember what the point was for me back in the day when I wasn't learning songs all the way through. I'm not sure why I thought that was enough. I honestly don't remember that. But looking back, now I realize that it wasn't enough, and that I think that I could have had a more meaningful relationship with music and, people who wanted to interact with my music by being listeners. It's like, oh, could you play a song for us? And that was a very limiting factor, not being able to play a song because I didn't really have anything that I could play all the way through. Like, oh, well, here's a snippet of a song. That's not, it's something I definitely don't want to say that it's not worth your time to learn cool things, or it's not worthy, or it's not XYZ, but it means so much more to the listener and the relationship that you can have with the listener if the story is complete. I could go on for hours and hours about all the things that I think are important for folks to work on and things that have helped me over the years. But really, that's a lot to chew on. There's a lot of really good actionable steps in there that you can take. If you want to find out more about any of the specific things that you can do, check out my website, liveukulele.com, for more information and to find lessons regarding a lot of those subjects. Last thing I'll leave you with is to perform. Even if it's for your dog, by getting your music to a place where you feel comfortable, like you can perform it, it's really brings about that kind of musical discipline of being able to learn a song and then practice the song until it's at a place where you feel comfortable performing it. That's a big part of the musical journey, and it'll teach you a whole lot about the song and about practice and about music in general, just being able to take that piece and present it. I know for me that one of the greatest joys in life is performing. You get up on stage and, maybe you're nervous at first and you're not sure, how it's going to go. And, am I going to be able to play the notes right? Am I going to sing on key? And then you get up on stage and you do it. And, provided you don't completely bomb, which does happen and can happen, but that's why you prepare. The more you practice, the less likely you are to bomb. But you get off that stage and such a rush, and it's so exciting and so uplifting to be able to partake in that. And that's always super exciting for me, and something that I've certainly missed during the COVID slowdown of the music business and the lack of gigs, is that there's not really any chance to perform. Certainly not a chance to perform at like a show where you're on stage and, you know, there's a big sound system and you get to be kind of the star, as it were. That's really special. That's pretty cool. And even if it's just for your parents or for your roommate or whatever, that little bit of butterflies and nervousness and that little bit of extra pressure that performance pushes on you, it can kind of leverage out that feeling of that exhilaration of being able to share the music in that way. And it's really great. And I think it's something that everybody should try at least once. Because at the end of the day, that's really what music is about, is being able to share and to uplift people. And for the most part, you know, most people are going to be very forgiving about what you're playing, because most people don't play music. That's what I've learned over the years, is that if I go up on stage and I make a mistake, 99% of people don't notice. The only people who do notice are musicians, other musicians, or if I acknowledge the mistake. If I make a mistake and then I stop, everybody knows it was a mistake. But if I make a mistake and I keep going, most people won't notice. And the same is going to always be true for your audience, unless you're playing in a room with a bunch of high-level musicians, in which case, you know, they're going to appreciate the effort you've put in to get yourself to where you're at. And if they don't, you know, screw them. They're obviously not the kind of empathetic people you want to be surrounding yourself with. So that is a lot of information. Hopefully some of it you found valuable. Hopefully there's some of it that you can implement into your own practicing. Music is a journey. There's nowhere to be, but you got to keep the car on the road. And hopefully I can help you do that, help you learn to steer a little bit better with these podcasts and with my lessons. Once again, please go subscribe to the podcast if you're not already. It's something that helps the cause, helps the exposure of the podcast and the work that I do. You can also go check out liveukulele.com for lots of free lessons and handout kinds of materials, along with my ebooks and my course. Soon to be 2 courses. Left Hand Technique is on the way. Can't wait to get that out to the world, but it's going to be a minute. Stay tuned. It's going to be great. Really am super excited about the learning and the different things that I'm going to be able to share with you folks, and that we can explore regarding taking ukulele playing to a higher level. Thank you for tuning in. Tell your friends, tell your dog, and just remember, play music. That's the bottom line that I always keep coming back to, is that in this world, it's so easy to get confused and to get down on doing things a certain way, and, you know, maybe life isn't working out quite as we hoped or we anticipated, especially right now. But that music is kind of a window into a different world. And if we embrace that different world, if we embrace that different way of thinking, I think that is really valuable for our souls and for our wellness, to be able to experience that art and to engage that other side of our brain. So mainly what I want to say by that is play intuitively. Just explore, you know, approach the instrument as if you were a child. Try and always discover new things. Play. They call it playing music because it's play. It's not work. It's not supposed to be hard. It's supposed to be fun. Think about, you know, if you're a child, you're out exploring, you're out creating imaginary scenarios, just always creating everything. Try and bring that to the instrument, because all of us in the big picture have so little time involved with music that we really are children in that aspect, to that craft of the music. So thanks for tuning in. Thanks for joining me. And I'll catch you back here on the first and third Saturdays of every month. Next episode I'm really excited about. I interviewed my friend Kelly Hyde from up in Kohala. She's an amazing songwriter and a baritone ukulele player. Fabulous voice, and really one of my favorite musicians on the island to run across. She played a number of songs on the podcast and sent me over some music files so I could share even more. They're all fabulous. I hope you'll tune back in to hear what she has to share and to hear some of her music. Until then, all my very best. I'll catch you down the road. Aloha.